The day had started like so many others for Sarah Whitmore, the widow who carried the weight of a family and a farm on her weary shoulders. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that sharpened every breath and made the morning chores feel both harder and more necessary. The frost that clung to the grass caught the early sun and scattered it in silver shimmers across the fields. Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the chill seep into her bones despite the wool, and called out to her eldest son to fetch water from the well. Life had been unforgiving since her husband Daniel had died 2 winters ago. It had been a sudden fever, the kind that swept in quick and merciless, leaving her not only bereft of love, but also of the sturdy hands that had managed the farm's endless burdens. Sarah was left with 3 children. Henry, the eldest at 16, tall and restless. Martha, her sweet 12-year-old daughter, whose quiet strength mirrored Sarah's own. And little Samuel, barely 8, a boy who had learned too early that childhood could not always afford softness. Together they had scraped by, the farm limping along under the determination of a woman who had no choice but to endure. That morning, Sarah moved through the barn with her usual efficiency, sweeping the hay into neat piles, checking on the 2 milk cows, and ensuring the feed bins were not empty. The scent of hay, manure, and the faint sweetness of the horse's breath was familiar, grounding, almost comforting. But as she bent to lift a pail, something made her pause. There was a sound, faint, muffled. Not the restless shuffling of livestock or the groan of old wood. It was a human sound, low and ragged, like the breath of someone trying to hold on to life. Sarah straightened slowly, her heart tightening. She glanced toward the far end of the barn, where the shadow pooled thickest near the stacked bales of hay. "Henry," she called, her voice steady though her fingers trembled around the handle of the pail. Her son appeared in the doorway, his lanky frame silhouetted against the morning light. "What is it, Ma?" "Over there," she whispered, pointing. Henry frowned, but he moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly against the dirt floor. When he reached the haystack, he froze. "Ma," he said, his voice breaking between disbelief and alarm. "There's a man here." Sarah's heart lurched. She hurried forward, pushing aside a pile of hay to reveal the figure sprawled there. It was a man, yes, a cowboy by the look of him. His hat lay discarded beside him, his shirt torn and dark with blood that had seeped through the cloth in alarming patches. His face was drawn pale, but even beneath the grit and sweat, there was a ruggedness to his features. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, the kind of face that spoke of long days under a relentless sun. "Oh, Lord," Sarah breathed, kneeling beside him. She pressed her hand to his chest, relieved to find the faint but undeniable rise and fall of breath. He was alive, though barely. "Martha," she called, her voice sharper than she intended. Her daughter came running from the house, skirts hitched in her hands, eyes wide with worry. "Fetch me clean cloths in the basin," Sarah ordered. "Quickly now." The girl didn't hesitate. Within minutes she was back, breathless, carrying what her mother had asked for. Sarah set to work, her hands steady despite the fear knotting her stomach. She tore open the man's shirt, revealing a wound that traced across his ribs, angry and red, with blood still sluggishly oozing. It looked like he'd been cut or perhaps grazed by a bullet. Either way, he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. "Ma, who is he?" Henry asked, his tone edged with suspicion. His young face was hardening into manhood, already carrying the instinct to protect what little they had. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, dipping the cloth in water and carefully cleaning the wound. The man groaned faintly at her touch, his eyelids fluttering though he did not fully wake. "But whoever he is, he won't live long if we don't help him." Henry shifted uneasily. "If he's trouble. Folks don't just collapse in barns for no reason. What if someone's after him?" Sarah met her son's gaze, her own eyes firm. "He's a human being in need, Henry. That's reason enough to help. Trouble or not, we'll not turn away from mercy." Reluctantly, the boy nodded, though she could see the tension in his jaw. They worked together to ease the stranger onto a pallet of straw. Sarah stitched the wound with careful precision, the needle trembling in her hand, though her movements remained sure. It had been Daniel who once handled injuries, his steady hands repairing tack, tending livestock, even patching neighbors when accidents happened. Now that burden, like all others, had fallen to her. By the time she finished, the cowboy's breathing had evened slightly. He was still unconscious but alive. That much was certain. Sarah covered him with a blanket, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Martha," said softly, her voice carrying the kind of innocence only a child could cling to. Do you think he'll wake up? Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair back with a weary hand. I hope so, sweetheart. For his sake, I surely hope so. Little Samuel had appeared by then, his wide eyes fixed on the stranger with both awe and fear. Is he a bad man? He whispered. Sarah hesitated, glancing down at the cowboy's still face. There was a mystery here, no doubt about it. A man doesn't end up bleeding in another's barn by chance. But she could not burden her children with fear, not yet. We don't know, she answered gently. All we know is he needs us right now. The children accepted her words, though uneasily. Henry lingered near the barn door, scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to come riding in at any moment. Martha busied herself with fetching more water, while Samuel sat cross-legged a safe distance from the man, watching him with the wary curiosity of a boy who longed for stories of adventure, but had only ever known hardship. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, warming the fields, and the work of the farm called, but Sarah's attention remained fixed on the stranger. She spooned water to his lips when he stirred, careful not to give too much, and pressed cool cloths to his fevered brow. She prayed silently as she worked, asking for strength, for guidance, for the safety of her children. Late in the afternoon, the cowboy stirred more strongly. His eyes opened, gray eyes, stormy and sharp despite the haze of pain. For a moment he seemed disoriented, his gaze darting around the unfamiliar barn before settling on Sarah's face. You're safe, she told him quietly, pressing a hand to his shoulder when he tried to rise. Lie still. You've lost a lot of blood. His lips parted, cracked and dry. A water, he rasped. She lifted the cup to him, helping him drink. He swallowed greedily, then coughed, grimacing at the pain that followed. Who are you? Sarah asked softly once he'd calmed. The man's eyes narrowed, studying her with a wariness that spoke of a life lived on the edge of trust. The name's Colt, he managed after a pause. His voice was gravelly, worn. Oh, Colt Travis. Sarah nodded. I'm Sarah Whitmore. These are my children. You're in our barn. Colt gave the faintest of nods, his gaze shifting briefly toward the children before returning to Sarah. He didn't mean to bring trouble, he murmured. His eyelids fluttered again, exhaustion dragging him back under before she could ask what he meant. Sarah sat back, her heart heavy. The words echoed in her mind. Didn't mean to bring trouble. It was confirmation of Henry's fears, proof that this man's presence was not accidental. She looked toward the barn doors where the fields stretched quiet and golden in the fading light. The world outside seemed deceptively peaceful, but she knew in her bones that peace was fragile. Whatever path had led Colt Travis to bleed out in her barn, it was not a simple one. And now, whether she liked it or not, their lives were tangled in it. As dusk settled, Sarah gathered her children close inside the warm glow of the farmhouse. They ate supper quietly, each child lost in their own thoughts about the stranger lying in the barn. Sarah forced herself to eat, though her appetite was gone. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing against the fragile walls of her home. That night, when the house was silent and the children were asleep, she slipped back into the barn. The lantern light flickered across Colt's face, casting deep shadows. He slept fitfully, his brow furrowed as though he were caught in dreams he could not escape. Sarah sank onto a stool nearby, exhaustion pulling at her limbs, but she could not look away. She thought of Daniel, of the life they had once shared, of the certainty she had lost when he died. She thought of her children, their futures as fragile as saplings in a storm. And she thought of the cowboy, a stranger whose very presence whispered of danger. She didn't know why he was here, what had driven him to their barn, or what kind of men might follow. But deep inside, Sarah knew one thing with chilling certainty. His arrival was no accident. And whatever storm he carried with him, it was now on their doorstep.